welcome to the Bar Exam Drills Predictions Podcast. I'm Sando, one of the founders of Bar Exam Drills, and I have my friend Walt Bernard. Is this all your offices here? One in King of Prussia? Is that it?
Yeah.
And one in South Commons?
South Commons is just a street. That's in Pittsburgh. So the King of Prussia, that's Philly area.
And you're licensed in 4 jurisdictions, Pennsylvania, Georgia. I saw Georgia was more recent, New York and New Jersey. I put in the notes here with a question mark. I don't know if you want to talk about it or not, but
we'll talk about it later.
Okay, so
Yeah.
not a big deal. Do you want to mention the lawsuit with?
I think it actually would be good to have another podcast. That might be a podcast in of itself.
Yeah, totally.
I think that would be good conversation for about constitutional law and criminal procedure. So I think that discussion and judicial immunity, I think that would be a whole podcast within itself. Yeah.
And I don't know when you're allowed to talk about it too, like when it's like next year or what?
What we're going to do is do another amendment to the complaint, but a lot of it is on the public domain. So I think that I could talk about most of it. 90% of what happened, that's factual. It's on the record. That's not confidential. I think that we could talk about that.
Okay, we'll talk about that a little later. If anybody wants to Google it, see what we're alluding to, they can. But we'll probably do an episode on that later. And then it could also be bar prep, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to say to the viewers that these are just predictions, right? They're totally just predictions. And how I did this spreadsheet was it's 2 kind of data points. It's what they've tested the most going back in time, and then also what they tested most recently. So you have 2 different data points that you have to reconcile. So that one, I have a lot of history there, and I can go back quite a far away. I don't see a butterfly formation.
No. It's so random.
Yeah. But you do see this kind of formation where it's kind of like even. Does that make sense? Do you see it? Well, do you have it?
Yes, I do.
See there.
It almost looks like a bunch of 8s. Start to see a pattern. I'm wondering if it's tougher because the landscape of the test has changed, but I'm wondering what this looks like further expanded. But
to 11. There's probably a way to do it in Google Sheets, but I just went all the way to the letter Z, and I just kind of stopped. I can go back further, but you have a lot of landscape changes, like you just said, with them going from 3-day test to 2-day test, so 6 questions to 5 questions, 1 PT. So definitely professional responsibility.
Definitely professional responsibility. There was one time when they didn't have it.
Yeah, February 2015 there. Column T.
That's a given. And what shocks me is that it's probably one of the most underestimated topics. If you know it's going to be on there, people will just skip over it and they'll try to study at the last minute. And so as a result, it's not a very, difficult subject, I think, because a lot of it is common sense. But because of that, people underestimate it, don't study, and then they go into the test and it can affect the score.
Yeah, just hit it if you know it's a 90-something% chance of being on the community property. It hasn't been tested in a long time. I sort this thing from most tested to least. So community property hasn't been tested for over a year. But trust, I know you're thinking for sure, and I'm thinking for sure. What do you think? Probably
I think
crossover too.
Yes. So I think with all the divorces in California, even though a lot of attorneys hate family law and community property, California bar examiners love it. So I definitely believe that it could be a full-on community property question. Sometimes they cross over community property with wills and trusts. I would think that there's going to be definitely community property, and there could be community property / trust or a full trust. So I definitely think both of those are going to be on the test because they're ripe for the testing.
I wrote down evidence. It wasn't tested, and there has been since 2013. It wasn't tested 3 times in a row. This is only once, but in the last few years, it's only skipped once. So it's looking pretty high up there too, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree. I think one, you're going to think definitely get at least 2 MBE subjects. Bar examiners love to test evidence, and typically when you have evidence, it's a racehorse from the moment you start. There's a lot of layers, and I think California bar examiners know it's very difficult to finish the evidence within the amount of time if you want to get to all the issues. So I definitely can see evidence coming up.
How about torts? It's been tested a couple times in a row, but it was just tested. I put that in the lower, not absolutely not, but in the medium-ish.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Yes. And that's the thing with torts. It's like they love to cross over torts with remedies and also contract remedies.
I kind of think contracts hasn't been tested for a while, and they love contracts. So if you're gonna do one or the other, I would say contract more.
Right. And I believe the last time they tested contracts, it was the UCC. So I could see them testing common law. And then contracts and remedies go hand in hand. So I would say that within the contracts, make sure that you understand remedies as well. Those are always weaved in.
Next one on the list is property, real property. It's skipped over once now, but there's been a 3. I would say that's like a medium-ish, right?
Yes. And that's the thing about property is it is one of the hot topics. It could come up, but there's so many other areas that the California bar could test. And I think if property does come up, it's a good chance they talk about landlord tenant. There's just so many areas, mortgages, you have liens and foreclosures. I think those haven't been tested in a while. So there's a lot of areas that they could go with property if it comes up.
What do you think about con law this time?
I would think con law is low on the priority list. I know there was a while where they didn't test it for a while. Then there was a year it came up. There was a long gap. And con law traditionally hasn't been favorite area of the California bar examiners. But yeah, we had that long gap where we didn't see con law for a while. And then they tested it back to back. I think con law is going to be low. Priority list coming up. You just never know.
I think both Crim Pro and Crim Law is very low.
I agree. I think there's so many other areas of MBE subjects they could test. If they do test for Crim Pro, I think there would be maybe one subsection of evidence as a crossover, but I think evidence is definitely a higher priority than Crim Law.
I think we're good on this. To go over it, professional responsibility, trust community property, evidence, contracts, and contract remedies. Probably property higher than torts, and then con law and crimes, everything else.
But how many MBE subjects are there?
Out of 5, you're going to get 3 or 4 that are MBE subjects. So contracts, 1, 2. I think this time it's going to be 3 MBE subjects and then a torts.
What I haven't seen in a while is the taking clause. Because what that does is that covers property and constitutional law because it's the Fifth Amendment. I haven't seen an essay on that in a while. Or like eminent domain when the government takes property from somebody.
Under property and con law.
Yes, because it's the government coming in taking property, but it's one of the few times where you see, I can't remember how California classifies it, but they will typically classify as constitutional law because it's the Fifth Amendment, but then other times that the government has to follow that test in order to take property.
I'm just looking at how frequently they tested it in the last. It's just a quick little thing. I could search in the app under takings.
Okay, I see it.
The earliest we have it in the app is 98. So there's a 2-year pattern in the first 3. You see it?
Yes.
98, 00, and then 2002, and then 2010, and then 2015. So that would make 2021, but maybe the pandemic threw things off. So it is looking like they should test it, right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? According to that, the last time they tested it. So
that'll give you another MBE subject.
yes. So let's go back to the main spreadsheet. Yeah, that's looking pretty higher up now. Got the 5th one if you want.
Yeah. Did you consider that the takings clause a property question or con law?
Oh, I mean,
yeah,
it's a crossover.
It's so specific.
There's these series of MBE questions that I remember where it'll be a tenant and then they call it condemnation, right?
Yeah.
And they'll take it and then it'll be like, well, what can this tenant get from this condemnation now? Part of that just compensation? Can they get part of that? And I can't remember what the rule is, but I remember there were some questions on that and they could ask about that.
Yeah.
You'll have Tom the tenant and then Larry the landlord and then or Tuan the tenant.
Yeah, I actually don't think the tenant
Gets
can
any.
because he's not the owner. In the news during COVID, because commercial tenants and they couldn't operate, so they tried to sue the government, but there was no standing. So an issue that could come up.
I'll try and look up the MBE that it totally dealt with it. So I remember it was kind of a surprising outcome for some reason to me, what the right answer was. But
Yeah.
anyways, but I could totally be wrong on that. Been a while. Okay.
Let me ask you this real quick. What do you think the 16B and corporation? It hasn't been tested, but then you hear about some of these white collar crimes, and I just know that the California bar examiners haven't tested it in years. It hasn't come up.
Okay, I just typed in. See, it's some people put a hyphen in it, and then some people so they'll go 16. So it's hard to kind of search. So if I put in 16B no hyphen, I'll send that to you. Should I text it or? So the last time 16B was tested was 2002.
Yeah, and I don't know why they haven't tested it. They went cold turkey.
So the pattern there is 95, then 2 years later 97, 99. So there's like a 2-year gap each time, but we're looking at 21 years since they tested it, right?
You're right, and I don't know why they haven't.
Like I feel like it would be hard for a lot of people maybe because it's so I don't know why they haven't tested either, but that's the last time they tested it. So
Yeah,
okay.
maybe they're completely moving away from it.
Yeah, it could be. I don't want to say much more on that because I just have no
know.
idea, man.
I
It's
know,
just
I
like,
know. Yeah, property is a possibility. I think another thing with predictions is a lot of times you look at what has happened within the last year, the national news, and those are topics that tend to come up. If you notice, we're coming out of COVID, so you had a lot of real estate, commercial, landlord, tenant. So I think that's an area that is a hot topic in contracts and real estate. So
yes. With the eviction stuff, you mean, and all that kind of stuff?
yes, eviction as far as like residential leases, a lot of property and contract issues overlap. So I could see contracts really coming up in the next exam.
Would it be better to delve into these topics more, or would it be better to skip to the other predictions and then maybe we could do separate podcasts, like we could do a contracts one and just talk about. I think the way to do it is to do an overview one.
Yeah, I think so.
So maybe forget about this for now.
Okay, all right. I think that's a solid prediction.
And disclaimer, could be totally wrong. It happens, but it's looking like this is going to be it.
Yeah. The other thing I will say is what I've noticed is when it comes to constitutional law, when there are areas that are more recent, like within the last 6 months, a lot of change in constitutional law, there's cases that come down. There's been a lot as far as freedom of religion, the Establishment Clause. So I've noticed that the bar examiners tend to stay away from those topics when they're so recent. If a new ruling comes down within the past 6 months in an area of con law, then it's more likely than not that's not going to be tested.
I agree. I don't think if you're testing people, you don't want to open up a can of worms for yourself and right for the
Right.
examiners. You know, I think we could do separate episodes later on covering these more in depth.
Yeah.
But I think just to do an overview, good. I guess I just want to say stay tuned for the in depth for all of them. Whatever Walt is willing to go in depth with, we'll do that. Thanks for watching our predictions video. Reach out if you want to opine or comment. Go in the comments and let us know how we got it wrong or we're gonna get it wrong. If it's after the exam, you could let us know how we're totally wrong too.
All right. Thanks, guys.